Randor, the most medieval royalist figure in the line. I'm ToyGuru Neitlich, and I was the brand manager for Masters of the Universe Classics for 90% or so of the line before it headed over to Super 7 to go out on an awesome finish. And this video series is going figure by figure, talking about how we made the figures, why we made the figures, where we made the figures. Well, actually, some of those are obvious. I mean, where was Mattel and why was because there's a fan base. But let's talk about King Randor. So it's important to note that the Classics line came right on the heels of the 2000X line, only about 2 or 3 years after it ended. And we look back now and it's been 10, 15 years since the first figure came out, but at the time 2000X was super popular, especially with the adult collectors. And I think a lot of them, myself included, I was a customer of the line, I wasn't working at Mattel, felt the line ended and the show ended prematurely. I mean, the show was amazing. Dean Steffen's scripts and just everything. It was an amazing show. And Randor never got a figure in the 2000X line. He did get this really awesome staction. Actually, I think it may have been more of a statue, or it was a deluxe staction, because I know it came in a box, not on a card. And it sort of only whet the appetite for people to get a fully articulated 2000X figure of him. I remember they even did 2 different versions of him. They did this regular one where he had a sculpted cloak and he came with his sword and his staff, and then they did kind of a deluxe version of him that was only at Comic-Con, where he came with a shield and he had like a furry cloak on. And I remember being really upset that I actually couldn't get the deluxe one, because the only way you could get it was if you bought every convention item. I forget. I don't know if it was. It wasn't Mattel selling this. I honestly can't remember. Maybe it was NECA or Diamond. But you had to buy every item they had in order to get the Randor. So I never got my Randor. So finally getting to him in Classics was kind of a long time payoff for me personally, because Randor, as I said in the 2000X series, which had just ended, was a huge character in the show. I mean, he was really. He started off the whole pilot. Was what kind of his story was in the original episode. So I think he was way more prominent in 2000X than he even was in the Filmation line, and that led to all this buildup of really wanting a Randor figure. And I think that's one of the reasons that we got to him quickly in the 2009 line, because to sort of feed that pent-up demand for at least getting to a Randor. And it should be noted that Randor was supposed to be a little earlier in the year. In fact, every figure was supposed to be 1 month earlier. In fact, actually, the last one, Scareglow, he was supposed to be the October figure for Halloween, but he got pushed out to November, and that meant Randor was December. So, yeah. And it didn't stop fans, from wanting to do their own versions, maybe ones that were more closer to 2000X. Even though our figure was based on the vintage figure, there were a lot of really cool customs out there, and fans were doing some awesome stuff. But this figure was definitely going to be based off of the vintage figure. Mostly because it was the tooling. We had, there was very little tooling to do him in the Classics line, much like there was in the vintage line, and I'll recap that in a moment. But this didn't mean we couldn't do other Randors down the line, 2000X, Filmation. In fact, we did do more than one Randor eventually. But doing the first one, the vintage one, came first before we were able to get to things like the Filmation version, simply because of tooling. The first year we'd spent all of our tooling on those basic beast, reptile, and human bucks. And that does kind of bring us back to the vintage line, where I mentioned in the Scareglow video how Scareglow and Clamp Champ and Randor were part of this rush to market wave in the vintage line, where they got very minimal tooling. The vintage Randor figure had a new head. That was it. He had recycled armor, recycled weapon, and a cloth cape, which meant there wasn't much tooling. And that also helped in the Classics line, because here we were in year 1, and we'd spent so much tooling already on the base, the main bodies, the human and the furry and the reptile, and Tila, the female, that we had to really find figures that weren't going to be that expensive to do for the rest of the year, until we could hit 2010 and get a fresh tooling budget. So Randor kind of became a great solution for both the vintage line and Classics, in that he had very little tooling. He was essentially the human buck. He had Jitsu's armor, which here I'll show you kind of a comparison how his armor was reused from Jitsu. It was just kind of recolored, almost reversed colors from the red and gold. And then he had the staff, the spear that came with whiplash, and a cloth cape in the vintage line, which didn't have to be tooled. He really only had a tooled head. Of course, in Classics, we did tool up his cape, so he was a little bit more tooling than he would be. And no, he was not the Burger King. Yes, this would not be a Randor video if we did not mention the fact that, yes, he looks just like Burger King's mascot. But of course, that didn't stop fans from jumping all over this and even making their own custom figures, with Randor handing out delicious, delicious lunch for all of the rest of people in Eternia because, yes, he does look kind of exactly like the Burger King. I wonder if we could have sold this figure at Burger King's. That would have been really funny. Yeah, best ideas are sort of come after the fact, don't they? All right, Burger King jokes aside, let's talk a little bit about Randor and more about his origins as a character. So Randor was a late ad in the line. He came out again in that infamous low tooling wave, and this was because of his appearances in Filmation. Filmation really made him popular, but that was not actually where he started. He predated Filmation. His very first appearance was in the second wave of minicomics, after the Don Bluth, El Kaya minicomics, the DC ones. So here he is, in his very first appearance as just kind of an old king on the throne. He was not named. He was just noted as the King of Eternia, and Manny Faces was entertaining him because, as you may recall, Manny Faces is an actor ready for the camera. Well, actually, did they have cameras? They had Fearless Photog. I guess he counts as a camera. And anyway, so yeah, Randor was just sort of dropped in to make Eternia a little bit more medieval, more royal, to show that there was a royal family and that there actually was a structure to call it the government and society. But he wasn't named for much later. There were about 5 mini comics later. It was the PowerPoint Dread that came with the Talon Fighter, the record. That was the first time he was actually named King Randor. He was just a king, and he was always referred to as the King of Eternia. But here with the PowerPoint Dread was the first time that his name was used, and he looked a little different. He was old. His robes were all red. He was clearly a more aged king here. And as the mini comics went on, he definitely kind of took on more of that Filmation look, because Filmation made him much younger, gave him a brown beard, even though here he has a blonde beard, but at least he kind of has that Filmation sleeve look, I think. But when it came time to doing the Classics figure, we were definitely going to go full-on vintage, which, even the vintage figure, I think, was kind of inspired by Filmation, using, that existing armor pieces. That's why he had the blue cape. So it was to kind of at least pay homage to the blue robes that everyone saw on the animated series from Filmation, but it definitely had a unique look. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, in 2000X, he also had a very unique look. He was a lot more warrior. He did a lot more fighting. He actually had a battle-damaged leg. A lot of people may have noted he kind of limped around a little bit, and I loved that aspect of him. I thought that was such a great detail because it showed he had a history, he had a past, and it also blended the whole, technology and, medieval. And so kind of, here's that whole royal family done in Classics. We did get to a more royal throne room version of Randor based on his Filmation look once we got rights to do the Filmation figures in, I want to say it was 2012, 2013, that kind of opened up. And that was great because, it made the ability to make a lot more figures. But it wouldn't be a full Randor video without also addressing his brother, Kaldor. So Kaldor, as you know, became Skeletor, and as I mentioned in the 2000X series, they were kind of pitted as arch enemies. There was really like a Hamlet thing going on with, Skeletor was Adam's uncle, and et cetera, et cetera. And this was something that we really expanded in the mini comics that came with the Classics line. You'll see that Randor is on the cover of this one actually as a very young boy. We tried to do that with color cues because he was, without his beard and without the crown, it was going to be a little harder to tell who he was. So you can see kind of a young Randor being shielded by Miro, his father there. And this was the idea that Kaldor was the older brother. He was the one who was meant to be the heir to the throne, but through circumstances that were manipulated by Hordak, there's an accident in the palace, and Kaldor accidentally kills his stepmother, who is Randor's mother, and that leads to Randor becoming king instead of Kaldor. So you had these two brothers, this story of them that was brought into the 2000X series, and we really tried to expand that in the mini comics. I wish we'd gotten to this armored version of him too, with kind of the Galactus helmet that was from the 2000X series. That was a really cool look. And that's kind of the story of King Randor. He had a great backstory with his brother, and then he went on to rule Eternia and be a positive force for young children everywhere who wanted to look up to royal forms of government and look forward to democracy one day.